I finally saw Napoleon, the movie, the recent one with Joaquin Phoenix, and I liked it. It was a good movie. It's a good movie. It's enjoyable. It's interesting. I saw it in like two halves, like first night and second night. It's kind of long, but that's fine by me. I enjoyed it, so I guess that's it. Thanks. Roll the credits. Well, all right. I mean, we're here. We've come this far. Might as well just keep talking. I'll keep talking. Yeah, there's more to say. And as I said, it's a good movie. It's pretty good. But why is it not great? I mean, they spent a lot of money on this movie. I believe they budgeted $200 million, made $221 million, so you got a little bit of profit off it. So, but still, it's like it could have been great. Oppenheimer was great, and you're kind of dealing with this very big, interesting figure in history. So how come this is no Oppenheimer? What went wrong? Now, I don't pay that much attention to critics, but sometimes they have important things to say. For this movie, it sounds like it's kind of mixed. Some liked it, but probably a lot more didn't like it. And audiences kind of seemed mixed, but nobody was saying, you gotta see this movie, you gotta see it 8 times. I didn't see it in the theaters, obviously. I only saw it when it came to Apple TV, and mainly because it was free, which is a price point that really works quite well with me. But yeah, it sounded like it just didn't do that great in the theaters. I mean, 200 million is not small, but on the other hand, if other movies make $1 billion, then it is kind of small. I think there was a movie about a plastic doll that did much, much better, and it's about a plastic doll. Now, as far as the Academy Awards, I don't believe it won anything, and the nominations were like costume design, didn't even win that, visual effects, which I guess, I mean, it did have cannonballs flying and explosions and stuff like that, and production design, I believe, as well. So kind of not the biggest categories, not best movie, not best actor, and we'll talk more about that for sure. Although really, I mean, Joaquin Phoenix, I would say, is definitely among the top 5 actors of our generation. You cannot go wrong with this guy, especially when the characters are a little more eccentric. I mean, Tom Hanks and him, I think, are kind of apples and oranges to some degree, but in a lot of cases, I would say Joaquin's a better actor, and that's a lot, because Tom Cruise is a great actor, too. So it just seems like you can't go wrong with this guy, but not to have a Best Actor nomination? That's interesting. So again, what went wrong? Well, why is it good? Why is it not great? I think, for starters, historical accuracy has got some issues. Nothing, I don't think, too major that I saw that was like, whoa, that's completely different. But there were some, and then when I look at the list that they've been pointed out, I thought, well, yeah, okay, why did you do that? Because that's just stupid. I mean, this guy, Napoleon, probably one of the biggest figures in history, and for, not saying that's all good. I mean, 1 million people at least died because of him. Because he existed that were unnecessarily, and I don't know how many more maimed, wounded, psychologically, physically. It's just insane. I mean, great military tactician, and did a lot of other stuff too that's not even covered in the movie. But yeah, so you're dealing with this figure that you can do so much with, because he did so much in his life. But I guess the opening scene, the beheading of Marie Antoinette, Napoleon wasn't there, but in the movie, he's there. Why'd you put him there if he wasn't there? I mean, it just doesn't really add anything to the movie. I thought, okay, you just started off in the very first few minutes suggesting that you didn't read any history books or you just don't care. Then we get to the pyramids, and he's having his cannon try to blow off the tops of pyramids, and I guess hitting it. And again, that didn't happen, and it's like, why did you do that? And the director said something like, well, it's symbolic of how he conquered Egypt so fast. Like, not really. That's just kind of stupid. And the whole mummy thing, that's just kind of stupid. It sounds like, from what I read, Napoleon was very respectful of all this old stuff, and a lot of people are. It's like, nah, it's like, why would you do that? Apparently he never met Wellington, and in the movie he meets Wellington. So it was, again, like, it just didn't add anything. Like, wow, what if Wellington met Napoleon? Do most people even know who Wellington was? I mean, they heard of Napoleon, but probably not Wellington. So the idea they met Who cares? They didn't meet. Why'd you need to make them meet? You didn't even do anything that interesting with the meeting, so it was pointless. Now, other critics have pointed out, well, you didn't cover this battle, that battle, the marshals, this, all this stuff. So it's like, well, okay, you can't really criticize what was left out. You had to leave a lot of stuff out because it's only a three-hour movie, and the guy lived, 51 years and did a whole bunch of stuff. You can't cover it all. So I don't ding them for not including stuff. It's just like, it was just ridiculous things to point out. When you put something in that didn't happen, that's bad. When you just don't put something in that did happen, well, all right. It's just, there's limited screen time. I don't want to see a 6-hour movie unless it's a mini-series. But I guess they did, for all the money spent on these big battle scenes, some of it was historically inaccurate. And the worst part is when Scott was criticized about these things, his defenses were just silly. And I think one quote was like, well, it happened 400 years ago, and who knows what really happened. Well, no, it wasn't 400 years ago, it was more like 200 years ago, so you're already pretty far off. Do you not know when these battles took place? And his whole thing about, were you there? No, but that's like saying you can do whatever you want with 9/11 unless you were actually there, in which case you might have perished, or maybe you were near. It's like, that's a stupid excuse. That's like a 10-year-old excuse. I think he was trying to say, well, history isn't, we're not always accurate with our history. No, but we have things like consensus and writings and stuff, and if most people have agreed upon something, you don't need to change it and just say, well, they're all wrong and I'm right, or nobody's right, I guess he was trying to say. It's like, just don't make a historical movie or a movie based on a historical person if you just have no interest in doing anything factual to what we believe happened. That's just, to me, it was like, okay, wow, all right, this guy, no. Because it wasn't marketed as a fictional version. It was more of a documentary. It didn't have to be exactly right, but the guy's life was just so fascinating. You could put everything that actually happened that we know, and it would still be a great movie. So you didn't have to make weird stuff. Now, Titanic, I know they did that. They took some fictional things and put it to an historical event. That kind of worked because if you watch kind of the original movie, or one of the originals, A Night to Remember, done in the 50s, A Night to Remember just kind of has everything that happened with far less fictional things. And if James Cameron had did that, it would just been, well, why not just go watch A Night to Remember? Why bother having the same exact movie? Although he did recreate some of the scenes and some of the events, kind of the same thing. But having that whole fictional love story kind of added another layer on to make it kind of fun, and it worked. Now, Pearl Harbor kind of tried that, and it didn't work. And again, this is kind of getting sidetracked. But for Napoleon, you're kind of mainly dealing with just Napoleon, at least this movie did, and his wife, Josephine. So you need to really kind of follow what actually happened to Napoleon. But also, Ridley Scott may have directed it, but he didn't write it. And who wrote it? Well, someone named David Scarpa. What else did David Scarpa write? Well, I have a list. Looks like The Last Castle, The Day the Earth Stood Still, I guess the new version, All the Money in the World, Napoleon, and he will be working on Gladiator 2. Okay, but that's really not that big of a list. For a studio to spend $200 million on a movie, and the screenwriter has written, I don't know, 4 things, and it says he worked on 3 Man in the High Castle episodes, which again is kind of historical fiction. It was obviously fiction, but kind of based loosely on anyway, I'm getting sidetracked on that. I don't think he was ready to write this movie, especially because it was a real thing. Had it been like a fictional movie, space or whatever, that probably would have worked out better. But again, it doesn't suck. It's a good movie. It's just not a great movie, and I think something like this really should have been great. So I don't know about those scenes, if the cannonball, stuff like that. I don't know what the director just said, all right, I'm going to do it this way. I know it's that way in the script, but we're going to change it for this. And that can happen. I don't know. I'd have to see the original script, and it's probably not even something I can see. So who's to blame on that one? But we definitely can blame Ridley Scott for his just weak 10-year-old defenses. You weren't there, you don't know. He's 86, and I think maybe he's a little cantankerous, so I think that might have led to, and just a big disappointment in that film. He's directed a lot of films, a lot of really good films. What's his list? I'm glad I asked. Alien, Blade Runner, Legend. I like Legend. Thelma and Louise, fun movie. 1492, okay. G.I. Jane, the first Gladiator, there's a great movie. And that's kind of like, that does have a lot. It's weird to criticize him for this one and not, well, what about Gladiator? You seem to be okay with those historical inaccuracies, but I think that one, you're allowed a little bit more. This one, you're really kind of expecting what we know to be the truth, even though we weren't there. So he did Kingdom of Heaven, Robin Hood, the decent one, not the earlier one, and Martian, which I really liked. 9 Academy Awards for 44 nominations for his film. So the guy knows what he's doing. So it's hard to know, is it the writing, is it the execution or the direction? I mean, it's not so much the direction, it's just the choices made. It worked for me. I was not bored. I was always interested in learning more, even though I kind of knew after the fall, the Moscow campaign, the exiles, it's not going to be very exciting there. And they kind of summed up Trafalgar or Waterloo very quickly. So it's like, oh, okay. So, and by the time you get to his second exile, it's like, all right, yeah, we can finish now. And they did. It was like 6 years later, basically, drops dead. Again, a little bit of, it doesn't matter. Another interesting note that I read about Ridley Scott is that he keeps on his wall, it's a high school report, a report back in school when he was placed 31 out of 31 in his class. Like, who does that? Well, these days I don't think people do that, like post how bad you are. But I think it was like sort of like, yeah, like you tried to shame me and now I'm showing the world, which is a cool thing. You should be able to get rid of your shame. But on the other hand, sometimes you can lose your humility when stuff like that happens, saying, I'm the greatest, I'm the king of the world, and you won't take criticism for your movies, or you just think, I'm not going to defend it. One thing he said, well, yeah, the French critics don't like it. Yeah, well, the French don't even like themselves. Yeah, that's spoken like a 10-year-old who happens to be 86 years old. Now, I would say the other biggest issue, not just the historical inaccuracies, but really the reason it's not a great movie, is Napoleon himself, again, acted by probably one of the greatest actors of all time. But you just didn't, it's interesting, not even an Academy nomination, but you didn't give him anything to really do. He did as much as possible with this character. And I don't know, I don't know that much about Napoleon, the depth of him, but it sounds like if you did it properly, not the acting, I'm saying the acting was fine, it was just like the writing. The writing wasn't there for even someone as good as Joaquin be able to get something out of that as far as a nomination. He did a great job portraying him, but the dialogue, the things he did, they weren't deep enough. Now, I wouldn't say he's a flat character. You kind of have flat or round. If you don't like flesh it out or develop it, it's flat. So it was a round character, but I also think it was a kind of a static character, not a dynamic. It doesn't really go anywhere or learn anything. Maybe Napoleon didn't learn anything. I learned like some of his campaigns weren't very good, or don't attack Russia in the winter. But yeah, there wasn't really any sort of change. I mean, he's nervous in the very beginning. You can see that. That might have been a little, I want to say overacted, but kind of like, that was really amped up. Although maybe he was. Maybe Napoleon was like just shaking, whatever. But it just sort of seemed like it doesn't really go anywhere, just sort of exists. And that's not great. And I mentioned great. It definitely is good. It's just not great. There are times when he's funny, and I don't even mind the times where him and Josephine are just kind of sitting there. They don't know what to say to each other. That could be totally accurate. It's hard to tell. But I also think, well, if Ridley or the writer didn't read any books about Napoleon or didn't care to because they don't believe what's in the books, then how would you even know? It's like, but it just seems like, yeah, there's no really lessons learned or whatever. He doesn't really think too deeply about these things. Maybe more narration would have been good for Napoleon himself. I don't know. It's not my job to fix it. Just kind of point out, well, my thoughts. That's what I get paid for. I don't get paid. And I wouldn't say that the movie vilified Napoleon or exalted him. It's just kind of, which is a kind of a cool stance to take, I suppose. Apparently the French adored and did love him. I mean, he made himself emperor. So you kind of have to be allowed to make yourself emperor. They had just gotten rid of kings. They didn't seem to like royalty. And then all of a sudden, you've kind of got royalty coming back. So, and it helps when you're winning campaigns and suddenly France is like the king of the world as far as, conquering armies. They just couldn't get over to England because the Navy, that whole little thing, the whole little bit of water in the middle, that just ruins it for everyone trying to take over England except the Vikings, but that hasn't happened in quite some time. But they also don't cover a lot about, I mean, they cover the relationship with him and Josephine to an extent, but it also kind of covers like, she had affairs and she's not good and she's infertile, and like, well, he had affairs too. They not lightly cover it, but yeah, it kind of just seems like he was sort of the hero. But here's an interesting thing. In 1798, Napoleon led a French army to Egypt. During this campaign, Napoleon started an affair of his own with Pauline Foureres, the wife of a junior officer who became known as Napoleon's Cleopatra, which is an interesting thing. And the relationship between Josephine and Napoleon was never the same after that. Yeah, so she had affairs, he had affairs, and it sounded like there was a lot of this kind of stuff going on. So it didn't mean he didn't love her, but it just sort of makes her look like the bad guy or bad woman when he wasn't much better as far as that was concerned. Was it? I mean, it's not just like maybe she had the affair first and he's like, I'm going to get even, I'm going to have an affair. But also the wife of a junior officer, so we got adultery there going on, and adultery with someone in your own army. Oh man, that just really, I don't even know what to say to that. That's sort of some King David stuff going on right there. And interestingly is also kind of I don't know if he related himself to Caesar, but there are some similarities. So some of the things he did, like charging into battle, which I guess Napoleon didn't do. You weren't there. But Caesar did. So Caesar would lead his troops into battle or be a part of it sometimes. And by this point, leaders and generals and emperors weren't really doing that because the risks of if you lose your general, you've lost everything. I mean, it's not just the symbolic, but you've lost the military knowledge. So that's usually a good reason not to have higher officers coming in. They would like to say, yeah, I'm as brave as anyone else. I'm sure you are, and probably were when you were lower ranking and actually did go into battle. But now you can't have the officers going into battle, or at least the high-ranking officers. Okay, well, that's my thoughts. That's why it's not a great movie. It's a good movie. Would I watch it again? Nope. But there's most movies I wouldn't watch a second time unless there's a really good reason. Oppenheimer I wouldn't watch a second time. So this one, hopefully lessons learned. I think they'll keep doing and investing big amounts of money in stuff like this. I think it would be a good, I mean, there's 5 movies, a musical, guys. But there's also a miniseries or 2 as well. This would be a really good miniseries. The only real issue is we have to be focused on Napoleon and Josephine most of the time. I mean, and maybe Wellington. I mean, how many other people in this era can you even name? I mean, the kings and queens and Prussia and Russia and Spain and England. Yeah, but you would have to kind of spread that out. And how can you really, have something called Napoleon when you're not really dealing with Napoleon? But if you just deal with Napoleon, that can get kind of boring for viewers and expensive. So I don't know if we'll ever see another big, expensive miniseries, at least anytime soon. And the movie, probably not anytime soon, considering how much was spent on this and probably how disappointing it was to a lot of people. But then again, you weren't there. Spoken like a 10-year-old. Cheers.